Welcome to Coffee with the Risk Manager, where we share a cup of coffee with colleagues and discuss all things higher education risk management. My name is Stacie Kroll, and I'm the Executive Director for Gallagher's Higher Education Practice. And I'm pleased to welcome Jen Howley as our guest on today's episode. What's particularly exciting is Jen is our first higher education risk management practitioner to share their insights on our series. So Jen, why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, great. Good morning, Stacie, and to everyone, thanks for having me. I work at Rhode Island School of Design. I've worked here for just under 14 years, and my role has evolved over those 14 years. I'm currently the Director of Risk and Emergency Management, and one of my responsibilities is the co-chair of the International Incident Response Team, which helps me with today's conversation.
Again, thanks, Jen, for being here today. And are we drinking out of any special coffee mug?
Sure. I don't know that I have any really special mugs, but most of mine are souvenirs from places I've been, and this one's no exception. It's from the Southwick Zoo, a place that I love going with my kids.
I also appreciate the Southwick Zoo with my daughter. So today I'm drinking out of my ERMIA 50th conference pint glass because for two reasons. One, it's 95 degrees here and there's no way I'm drinking a hot coffee. Secondly, we're gearing up for Seattle 2021. And I realized that the last time I've seen some of my ERMIA colleagues, yourself included, was in Boston for our 50th anniversary in 2019. So it's got a special place for me right now. So today we're going to be discussing a particularly hot topic that's continuing to evolve for our industry: the resumption of international travel in the midst of a global pandemic. And as you know, when we started planning this session, we were kind of thinking about this of resuming international travel post-COVID, but we're still in the midst of it. Our industry in particular is closely monitoring the Delta variant and its impact as we consider resuming our pre-COVID operations, including international travel. So I understand that at RISD, you're in the middle of your evaluation process. Maybe you can share some of your experience and kind of insights with us.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very much in the thick of it right now. We do not have any travel approved for this fall semester. So what we're evaluating right now are proposed international trips for our winter session, which is January of 2022. And I know it seems like that's far away, but I think now more than ever, the way that the hazard landscape is becoming increasingly more complex and has been over the past couple of years, our jobs as risk managers, it's also getting more complex, and we really need the time to plan and assess, work with our international teams, and even work with outside expert consultants when possible, so that we give ourselves the time we need to make these critical decisions.
Yeah, that's great. It certainly seems like a heavy lift for a single person. So I assume that you have a team working with you at RISD. Maybe you can share a little bit about how you're structured. How have you articulated the division of labor? Who's on your team, and kind of all of those dynamics?
Yeah, absolutely. And you definitely nailed it. This is not Jen recommending whether or not we travel this coming year. This is very much a team effort. I would say I rely heavily on the expertise of our global team, our international office, as well as that of some exterior consultants that we work with, namely International SOS, which is our assistance provider, as well as Lodestone International, who's done some program reviews for us in the past and is an expert in the areas of health, safety, and security for international travel. So our team is not really taking a different approach when we're reviewing these, but we are definitely taking a more conservative approach because right now there are so many more uncertainties. Health, safety, and security have always been a priority. And so our academic affairs team is taking a piece of this review. As the risk manager, I'm taking a piece. And of course, our global office is doing the same. So as the risk manager, I'm looking pretty specifically at country and region specific risks. And so not just COVID risks like the availability of medical care, or vaccination rates or even infection rates, but also the risks that existed before COVID. And many of which have been exacerbated by the pandemic, such as crime rates in some areas. So I've taken on that piece and worked with International SOS to look at some country-specific reports to look at those uncertainties. And then because we do faculty-led international programs, our academic affairs office is looking closely at faculty members' level of comfort in the regions that they're proposing that they travel to, as well as their expertise in those areas. And they're also looking at the number of faculty leaders that we would have on a trip. And so again, these aren't things that we didn't look at before, but we're taking that more conservative approach. And there may be some areas that we're not as comfortable traveling in now that we would have been in the past. The third piece really is our global office, who knows these programs so intimately. They have so much travel and international experience. And so they've been looking at in-country, on-the-ground support. So they're the office that develops those third-party relationships with institutions and organizations overseas. And so they're looking at how strong that on-the-ground support is outside of just our assistance provider. And then we're going to compile that information, those country-specific risks, that level of expertise for our faculty, as well as that on-the-ground support. We will provide that information to our international incident response team, who will then make a recommendation to leadership. And I'll just add that that international incident response team has been together for years. We work on pre-planning and response to international incidents. It includes legal, Title IX, public safety, risk management, student affairs, and a few other offices on campus.
Yeah, that's great to have such a comprehensive team. I think, in higher ed, we're really familiar with the Department of State warnings and the travel advisories. And we've often used those as the catalyst for making risk-informed decisions, right? So in the absence of a service provider such as ISOS, who may have country-specific reports, we've relied on the Department of State for that information. It's becoming clear that considering those advisories and those warnings in isolation is not proving comprehensive enough to make those comprehensive, thorough analyses that are necessary in this moment. So what other kind of resources have you used in conducting that analysis, in addition to using your service providers?
Yeah, well, first of all, I totally agree. We do still look at U.S. State Department warnings. We look at information that's put out by CDC and the World Health Organization, because they do have some good recommendations and good information, but we don't solely rely on those, like you said. Again, I have to keep giving credit to the people that are experts in this field, like Lodestone International, but ISOS, as well as colleagues at other institutions that just have maybe deeper knowledge in this area that I work with and get information from. But there are also some tools like CIB T-Visa, which can help with gateway restrictions. So that question about whether or not people will have to be vaccinated coming in and out of countries, whether or not a period of quarantine is going to be required. There's also the Global Health Security Index, and you can get vaccination rates at World in Data. So there are lots and lots of resources. There are even some that you can pay for and have a membership to that can give some more detailed information. And I always like to underscore the free resources that are available to higher ed risk managers through our broker, through our insurance carriers, who of course don't want us to have any kind of loss or incident. So I know Gallagher has a webinar about returning to international travel. United Educators put out a podcast on returning to travel. That was actually the place that I started thinking about those existing risks that may have been exacerbated by COVID that I hadn't really given much thought to before. UE also has an article on international travel. So those are just great reminders about what we should be thinking of, how we should be preparing our travelers, and what additional risks might be existing now, like I said, in this ever-changing landscape.
So I may already know the answer to this question based on your feedback thus far, but I think we're all looking for the silver bullet. We're looking for the rubric, the standard rubric for evaluating travel. Have you found that, or are you conducting this analysis country by country, trip by trip, and making that individualized assessment?
Yeah, I would even go further than to say we're looking at each country, and I'd say we're looking at each trip very specifically. If you take our own country, for example, right now, you couldn't even give it one risk assessment based on the entire country. You'd have to look at specific regions because the COVID risk varies greatly from one region to another. And the same would be true for the risks that we're normally assessing, like crime, political unrest, the possibility of natural disaster. And so I would advise people to continue to look at each trip and to continue not just to look at COVID risks, but the types of things we were planning for before, looking at accommodation, transportation, who's leading the trip, not only what region are you going to be traveling to, but what regions will you be traveling through. There is no easy answer that I've come up with. If you find one, let me know. But I would suggest being consistent with the review. So if you're asking questions about vaccination rates or infection rates, if you're asking questions about crime levels, be consistent in that review and document it if possible, so that if the question ever comes up about why you approved or didn't approve something, you can show what the reasoning was behind those decisions. Again, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Health, safety, and security have always been a priority in international travel. We've looked at this before, but travel is riskier than ever. Institutions, I think, really need to feel confident that they understand the risks, that they're managing them. And I think they need to be prepared to decide if a location is just too risky right now. We can't eliminate the risk, as you know, unless we eliminate the program, which nobody wants to do. But we can ensure that our travelers understand those risks and understand what support's available to them while they are traveling.
Yeah, that's great. And I really appreciate you sharing your insights. And I'm confident that our audience will find this incredibly helpful. So thank you again for joining us on this episode of Coffee with the Risk Manager, and have a great day.
Thanks.